A month ago, we experienced a bitter cold snap. Some of our customers were experiencing low temperatures of 20 below zero. The solar panels at our office were covered in 2 inches of ice and not generating anything at all. But the lower Snake River dams were generating 24/7 to meet the load. In fact, according to BPA's numbers on their website, they were providing over 10% of the total BPA system capacity during those peak load times.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest River Partners. They say that there's no such thing as a dumb question, and when it comes to the subjects we discuss here on DAM, hydropower, public utilities, clean energy, and the environment, that is certainly true. While no person could hope to answer every single one of those questions that could possibly exist, I recently discovered someone who is at least willing to try to answer a few of them on behalf of their community. It just so happens that that person is Bob Pierce, Chief Operating Officer at Clearwater Power in Lewiston, Idaho. As soon as I found this out, and Clearwater being one of our members, I had to see if we could get Bob on to ask him a few questions for our own audience. Luckily, Bob agreed, so on behalf of that audience, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Austin. My pleasure.
So I think the first thing that we'll just get out of the way is always trying to get a little bit of background knowledge about you as our guest and who you are and what you do. And I'm kind of curious, what does the job of being Chief Operating Officer look like?
Well, Clearwater Power is a pretty small company, so we wear a lot of hats. But basically, I oversee member services and operations. So member services includes a lot of diverse things, including billing, public relations, marketing, satellite internet, and energy conservation. Operation includes all of our line crews, metering, and the mechanic shop.
It sounds pretty simple, but I assume that it's much more complicated than that.
Well, there's a lot of things that go into an electric utility, but you just handle it day by day. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And as far as your background prior to becoming COO at Clearwater, what kind of things were you into throughout your career?
Well, education-wise, I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electronic Engineering Technology from Central Washington University. And I started out working for Clallam County PUD in Port Angeles, Washington. And that's where I grew up. And then after that, I worked at the City of Ellensburg, municipal electric utility there after I graduated from Central. And then I came to Clearwater, and I've held several different supervisory roles here over the last 31 years, including the last 4 years as COO.
Coming over from the west side of the state, going over to the east side of the state, have you enjoyed getting to make that transition?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I enjoy both of them, but I really enjoy it here in the Lewiston area and Clearwater Power's service territory. There's a lot of hunting and fishing outdoors activities, which is what I like to do in my spare time.
No, that makes perfect sense to me as an angler myself, so I totally get that. I have to ask too, for I guess the understanding of our own audience, could you maybe elaborate on kind of the community over there in Lewiston and the area that Clearwater serves?
And a lot of people get confused about that because our service territory is intermixed with Avista utilities. Basically, Avista was here first, and as a for-profit investor-owned utility, they served all the population centers like Spokane, Pullman, Moscow, Lewiston, and Clarkston, and other cities like that. Clearwater Power was formed afterwards as a nonprofit cooperative to serve the rural areas that had no electricity at that time. And so we're very low density, about 3 customers per mile of power line. But for people that aren't familiar with the area, if you just kind of picture that point where Washington and Oregon and Idaho borders all come together, we serve about 11 counties in that area, mostly in Idaho, but some in Washington and Oregon. And that ranges from Plummer and St. Mary's to the north end of our territory to a little city called Weippe in the east. And we serve the area south of Winchester and Waha in the south end of our service territory, and then down into Wallowa County and the very northeastern tip of Oregon. And then we just serve along the Washington border, like little towns like Anatone and Farmington, just a little ways along the Washington border there.
We don't, every now and then, I guess, logistically it makes sense anyways, right? But we don't always get the opportunity to talk to a utility such as yourself where you have a, a service territory that crosses over state borders. Are there maybe some unique challenges you could quickly touch on just in terms of, trying to deal with maybe navigating the different rules and regulations when you're going from Oregon to Washington to Idaho? Because I imagine they all have some different things that they require you to do.
They do, and it is becoming more and more of a challenge, honestly, regulatory wise. Idaho is pretty relaxed when it comes to regulations that affect utilities, but Oregon and Washington are very different in that regard. And things like net metering requirements, wildfire mitigation rules, Washington and Oregon both have very specific regulations when it comes to that, and they're not the same. And so it's hard when, like, if we want to come up with a policy on net metering for our members, we have to always put in exceptions for things like unless state law supersedes this, because it's a different rule for Oregon than it is in Washington, and we can't have one policy that covers everything. We have to treat those members actually differently, which is sometimes a little bit unfortunate, I think. But
Yeah, that does make sense, and I'm sure it is quite the challenge, but probably.
I was just gonna say, one thing that does really help is there's statewide co-op organizations like the Washington Rural Electric Cooperative Association and the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. And those organizations are really helpful at monitoring those state legislation as they keep coming up with new legislation and modifying existing legislation. Those guys help us keep track of the changes and the things we have to do to stay up with the statutes.
Yeah, we're big fans of those guys over here as well. Speaking of people we're big fans of, we had Scott Corbett on recently from the Port of Lewiston, and he was a great guest here on DAM and provided us a lot of insight into the shipping and transportation side of things over in that community. What is the relationship that maybe Clearwater has between yourself and the port?
Well, we have a great relationship with the Port of Lewiston. We are both aligned in our emphatic support of the Snake and Columbia River dams. So we work together many times over the years, just again and again, to help educate the public on the benefits of dams in general. And, when there's specific challenges against the dams, we're always working together to deal with that.
Oh, that's fantastic. And, kind of switching gears here a little bit now, I think that, the thing that really obviously sparked today's conversation was getting exposed myself to the Ask Bob section, which is a post that I believe is that monthly on Clearwater's site.
Yeah, it is. And that goes clear back to 1993 when I started with Clearwater Power. I was put in charge of publishing the 8 local pages of our Ruralite magazine, which goes out to all of our customers every month. And we still send that out to all of our customers every month. And since I was new to the communications world, I looked around at how other rural co-ops used the magazine, and almost all of them had a manager's letter with a picture of the general manager and a monthly column on what was going on with the utility. So I approached our general manager at the time and told him I thought we should do that. And I said I could ghostwrite the column for him and he could just edit it and approve it as he saw fit. And it would be pretty easy and wouldn't take much work on his part. He was absolutely against the idea and absolutely did not want his picture in the magazine under any circumstances. But, so I walked away and kind of scratched in my head, and I thought it was important to personalize our communications and have a spokesperson for the company that the people could put a face to. And my wife actually suggested the idea of Ask Bob, just a a column where customers could ask questions, obviously a Q&A format, and we could address some little more technical issues than we normally cover in our standard magazine articles. And it's been well received by our membership. And I actually got an award from the Northwest Public Power Association in 2018 for that column. It's called the Jim Brands Award, honoring a lifetime commitment to the public power industry. And I think it said remarkable work in the area of energy efficiency on the award. But writing that Ask Bob column continuously from 1993 to present was one of the major things they cited when they presented that award. So it's kind of neat.
That is really cool. Actually, I hadn't heard kind of all the history around that, and so I really appreciate, for myself and for our audience getting to hear about that. What have having done this since 1993, what have you enjoyed most about getting to do Ask Bob?
Well, I definitely enjoy tackling the more technical questions, many times on issues that just aren't being covered elsewhere, or worse yet, things that people are getting misinformed on, sometimes by salespeople that are trying to sell them gimmicks or gadgets, things like that. But the other great thing about Ask Bob is that it encourages a two-way discourse with our members. So I get a lot of questions by phone, email, social media, or on our website forum. And probably most of them are individual questions that are specific to an individual's account or situation. But others are things that do apply to everyone. And those are the ones I use in future Ask Bob articles. So I really appreciate that two-way communication.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me, and I would imagine that people probably really appreciate that as well. Have there been any memorable moments? I mean, obviously winning the award, I imagine, is a pretty big one, but have there been any memorable moments over the years from getting to do this?
Well, you mean like some of the more memorable posts or columns?
Yeah, or maybe some good engagement with the community as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one we just did a couple months ago where I talked about some of the problems with trying to replace the electric generation from the four lower snake dams with solar power, which has been in the Biden administration proposal. And that got a lot of coverage on Facebook. A lot of times after we published the Ask Bob column in the Ruralite magazine, we also put it out on Facebook for people to see on social media, and it got a lot of comments, a lot more than normal columns. So there's a few people on both sides of the issue. Most people were definitely in favor of the dams, but there was a few people that disagreed with my position.
Certainly, that's something we're all too familiar with here as well. So I definitely get that one. I that does bring me to the question. We identified a few things we wanted to run by you today, and that was definitely one of them. And so, as far as whether or not we can replace the power from the four lower Snake River dams with solar, what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, the short answer is no. And I guess, yeah, it's a little bit longer story to explain why. But theoretically, if you had enough land and you spent enough money on solar panels, you could generate the same amount of kilowatt hour energy that the dams put out. But that's not the full story. In fact, that's not even the important piece. What's important is the ability to meet load at the exact moment when it's needed on the grid. And solar generates really good at noon in July, when you have a ton of sun and it's coming straight down on the solar panel. But in January, it's only generating about 20% of that amount, even on a sunny day. And if it's a cloudy or foggy day, that can drop to zero. And in an ice storm, the panels can get covered in ice and snow and drop to zero generation. So the trouble is that at Clearwater Power, our load is 3 times higher in the wintertime than it is in the summertime, because most of our load is electric heat from residential accounts. And so solar generating all of its electricity in July is not a good fit for our load that occurs mostly in January and February. And I'll give you a specific example. A month ago, we experienced a bitter cold snap. I think most of the Northwest did. And some of our customers were experiencing low temperatures of 20 below zero. The solar panels at our office were covered in 2 inches of ice and not generating anything at all. But the lower Snake River dams were generating 24/7 to meet the load. In fact, according to BPA's numbers on their website, they were providing over 10% of the total BPA system capacity during those peak load times. And solar and wind on BPA's system were at zero or near zero during those same times. So if we had followed the Biden administration's plan and breached the lower Snake River dams and replaced them with solar power, we would have been at a very serious risk of rolling blackouts during that cold snap. And that's just not something that you can have. I mean, people would have died, when it's that cold. So another big difference that people don't know about hydropower is that it's dispatchable. One of the ways they utilize those dams is called spinning reserve. And for example, Lower Granite Dam has 6 turbines. They can take one of those turbines and have it spinning with water moving through the turbine. So it's up to full speed, but not connected to the grid electrically. And that way, when more power is needed, they can just flip a switch and immediately add about 135 megawatts to the capacity of the grid. But you can't do that with solar. You can't tell the sun to shine on a solar panel or tell the wind to blow on a wind turbine. So that's why hydropower is called firm power or dispatchable power when wind and solar is not.
Yeah, as someone who's been focused deeply on the subject for a long time, it all totally makes perfect sense to me. But I appreciate that explanation because, we are trying to reach an audience with this podcast who isn't necessarily an expert and doesn't necessarily have the expectation or the burden of being an expert by default. So it's really good to kind of clear up that story and really get that information out there. I just over this last weekend before our recording today saw that USA Today had released an article showing that renewable energy projects are oftentimes being rejected or even outright banned by, say, city or county or state governments faster than they're being built right now. Wind and solar obviously being kind of the large land users is one such reason for that. How much do you feel that something like that could factor into replacing hydro with solar as well?
Yeah, I read that article as well, and it is a big issue. Many people don't want to look at large scale wind or solar projects that are visible from miles away sometimes. And if they have adjoining property, they definitely have big concerns about how it'll affect their property values. And so it gets into things like setbacks, how far does a wind turbine have to be set back from the property line, that kind of thing. And it does make it difficult to cite those projects, but sometimes rightly so, in my mind, because it's not really fair for the adjoining property owners to have their property values decimated, especially if that generation is not even going to be a good fit for the region. Like in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada, solar can work a lot better because that generation at noon in July coordinates well with their air conditioning load. That's when they have their peak needs. At the same time, the solar's getting its peak generation. So it's a good fit generation profile to load profile. But like I was talking about earlier, it's more opposite to our load profile. So it's not a good fit. And I don't think it makes sense to condemn people's property values for that. But even if you can get approved to site, say, a 500-acre solar farm, one of the big issues that they didn't talk about in this article is you have to connect that to the grid somehow. And that can be a much bigger issue than building the solar farm itself. You need access to a substation and a transmission line that has capacity to move that power to where it's going to be used. And that typically means building new transmission lines and usually a new substation as well, which means getting easements and purchasing property getting easements from every property owner between the solar farm and where it needs to go. And that can cause delays that decades to try to get easements for every single, it only takes one property owner to block the entire project. So that can be another siting issue that a lot of times people don't understand that are outside the industry.
I have definitely heard those stories from some of our other members, and the time that it takes to get even a small section of transmission line built, it can be enormously challenging.
I guess the only other thing I'd say about that USA Today article is it talks about adding solar and wind to meet the federal clean energy guidelines by 2035. But it doesn't really talk about the fact that both hydropower and nuclear power also meet those same guidelines because they're 100% carbon free. And, sometimes I wish people would focus more on maintaining the hydropower we have and possibly looking at expanding our nuclear power.
It definitely is. It's a strange thing that comes up quite a bit. Is the questions around hydropower and whether it's considered a renewable resource. Maybe not in the eyes of the public or even by definition, but as it relates to those regulatory policies, it's definitely a big challenge that I think the industry has been trying to tackle.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing too that I think maybe would be good to clear up on this subject while we're here is a lot of times, people, I think they see things like rooftop solar, for example, and maybe in their minds that is what they're thinking of in terms of, replacing something like the lower Snake River dams with solar. But as far as, what we're talking about with a solar farm taking up a large amount of acreage to build out something like this, I mean, am I wrong in saying that rooftop solar alone would not be a realistic or, possible way for replacing those dams?
No, you're not wrong at all. I haven't run the numbers for exactly how many acres, but you're talking about thousands of acres of solar panels, possibly even into the tens of thousands. It would just be a phenomenal amount of area that would be required to generate that kind of power. Because you're talking about, the nameplate on the lower Snake dams is over 3,000 megawatts. That's 3,000 million watts. That's just a tremendous amount of energy.
And I have to ask for Lewiston or any of the surrounding communities out there that Clearwater serves. Do you think that there's an appetite for thousands of acres of solar panels anytime soon?
No, I don't. In general, there's not. I know the Nez Perce tribe, which is in our service territory, is very interested in that as an organization. But the individual members that we meet with generally are not. We have just to kind of give you an example, we have 11,500 accounts, most of which are residential. And of those 11,500, we have, I think, 85 customers who have rooftop solar connected to our grid. That's a net metering account. So it's a pretty small percentage.
Well, I really appreciate you taking us through that. I know it's, like you said, it's a controversial topic at times, and it certainly stirs up a lot of conversation and a lot of debate. But your insights and the work that you've done to kind of get all the facts together on that, definitely something that I think that our audience will really appreciate having. Kind of going up to the next question that we have lined up here is another topic that we've covered on DAM, and it's a topic that over the last 4 years, unfortunately, I would say is much more on the front of people's minds, and that is wildfires. And so it sounds like you have been getting a lot of questions as it relates to why people are experiencing more power outages when we hit that wildfire season.
Yes, and like you said, wildfire mitigation has become a primary focus for all electric utilities. Just because we have had an increase in wildfires in the like you said, about 4 years. So in 2021, we really scrutinized our wildfire mitigation practices. And part of that effort, we used U.S. Forest Service mapping data to identify the highest fire risk areas in our service territory. And in those areas, during the summertime, during the fire season, we changed the way we operate our grid. And we changed the settings on our recloser switches to what we call non-reclose. Because in normal operation, when those reclosers sense a fault on the line, such as a tree branch falling onto the wire, they will blink the power off for a second and back on again. And most of the time, that'll allow the branch to fall free, and the customer will only see a blink instead of an extended outage. If the fault persists, the recloser will actually try to energize up to 3 times. But if it's still faulting, then it'll lock out, which will mean a line crew will have to come out and patrol the line and look for the trouble to make it safe. But what we're doing now during the wildfire season in these high risk areas, when a switch is placed in non-reclose mode, it'll lock out right away. So the first time a branch falls on the line, that switch will lock out, turn off the power. And this means a line crew is going to have to come out. And if it's after hours, that means you got to call people at home, have them come into the shop, grab a truck and their tools and head out into the field. And it takes some time just to get them there. And then they've got to start patrolling the entire power line, looking for where's that tree branch or whatever the problem may be. So it can mean a outage of several hours. And because it's on non-reclose, it's going to be more outages than normal. And it's going to mean the outage duration is longer than normal because they have to do all that patrolling, because you absolutely can't turn the power back on with the risk of another branch in the line somewhere that may cause a spark. So yeah, unfortunately, although it significantly reduces the chance of igniting a wildfire, it does mean increased number of outages and increased duration of outages. And I think mostly that's just been an education process, because when I explain it to people, they do understand, because nobody wants wildfires. Everybody wants to avoid those at all costs. So when they understand what's at stake there and why we're doing it, they're much more understanding about the increased outages.
It definitely sounds like something that whether you're on the customer end and you're experiencing the outage, or you're the utility and your resources are being more heavily strained, because like you said, you got to send a crew out, and it takes time. It might happen at a really inconvenient time, and I'm sure there's costs associated with all of that as well. Yeah, the alternative of having a significant wildfire event is clearly the worst of the two options.
And another thing that is a possible mitigation standard or tactic is what's called a public safety power shutoff. And that's where you just shut off all the power proactively during a high fire risk time. Like, for example, when winds are going to be high. But we're trying to do everything else so we can avoid those power shutoffs, because in our neck of the woods, every single customer is on a well that's powered by electricity. And that includes the 33 different rural fire districts that use wells to fill their fire trucks, and most of those don't have backup generators. So if we were to shut off the power proactively to avoid fire, that means nobody can fight any fires that do occur. And plus, it's always during the hottest day of the year, typically, and no air conditioning, which can put some people at a health risk. And so we're trying to find ways to avoid complete shutoffs, but do everything else we can to reduce that risk of fire.
I'm really glad that you drew that distinction as well, because the news, I think, is often covering the public safety shutoffs. I think especially after some of the events that took place in California over the past few years, that became a big, kind of headline is like people are getting their power shut off before they even have a chance of having a power line spark a fire or something like that. But yeah, I think it's definitely good to draw a line there and say, that's not what you're doing. It's just maybe making it so the system obviously is more responsive to when something like that happens to make sure it doesn't turn into a wildfire.
Another concern with the public safety power shutoffs is defining when to turn it off and when to turn it back on again. Some people use like red flag warnings to do that, but those can go on for days sometimes. And then once the red flag is lifted, say it's been off for 2 days, you can't just turn the power back on again. You have to go patrol all of that line to make sure that no branches or trees blew into the line while that high wind event happened. And we have 3,000 miles of power line through some really rugged terrain. There's a whole bunch of it that's not near any roads. That a lot of it's walking access only. And so that could take a week just to patrol all that line before we could re-energize it. And so it's not just the 2-day red flag event that people would be off for. It could be another week after that. And that's just too long for people to be without power, and that's the kind of hurdles that we're looking at, when you realistically try to employ this in a rural area.
I think that's also a good point to make as well. Is everyone has different service territories. There's no two utilities that are identical in the type of places they serve and the people they serve, and so it makes sense that they wouldn't all have the same wildfire mitigation plans in place.
Yes.
I also have to ask too, because it's something that I've at least personally noticed these last few years, is that the wildfire season seems to be getting longer. I think it was just 2 years ago here that we had a very unseasonably warm fall, and there was a wildfire not far from my own home in late October, right? And it was, we were still in the 80s in temperatures during the day. So has that kind of lengthened fire season had an impact on how long you have to operate in the way that you're describing?
We definitely watch it, so we've only been doing it for 3 years now with this formal wildfire mitigation plan. So we don't have a long history that we've recorded, but our default is June 1st through October 1st, but we definitely monitor things. I know we had just 2 years ago, we had unseasonably hot June where we had temperatures like 105 degrees at the beginning of June, which is just really odd for us. And we had no rain all through June. Things were drying out, turning brown, and being a fire risk really early. Then another year, we've had rain through the 4th of July when normally things are always dry by the 4th of July, So it really does change year to year from the weather, and I think we're just going to have to watch it. I mean, fire is such a big issue; it's so critical. We just are going to have to take each year on a case by case basis.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And given what has happened in other communities, both here in the Northwest and really across the West Coast, I think that it's kind of a no-brainer at this point to be taking that approach. Kind of again, switching gears, getting to another one of the questions that we identified as a big hit for Ask Bob. People want to know what the difference is between an energy charge and a demand charge. Could you describe that?
Yeah, you bet. This is a question I get a lot because we just started charging for demand in January of 22. So it's a relatively new thing. And I think that's the case with a lot of utilities. And energy charges are what everyone's used to. That's what's always traditionally been on a bill. That's measured in kilowatt hours. And for people that don't know what a kilowatt hour is, If you just picture that you operate a 1,000 watt appliance for 1 hour, that's 1 kilowatt hour. And at our utility, that costs about 9 cents. Just kind of give people a picture in their mind of what we're talking about. And the meter will register those kilowatt hours cumulatively throughout the whole month. So they add up. The longer you run your appliances and the more things you turn on, they just add up and you get billed for the total at the end of the month. And most people are fairly familiar with that. But demand is a very different thing. It's a measurement of your peak usage. So this would be the one time of the month when you had the most things on at one time. For example, if your electric furnace and your water heater and your dryer all came on at once during laundry day, those are all big ticket items that use a lot of watts. So that might be your peak for the month. And it can occur just for 5 minutes, and that sets your peak that you're going to get charged for the month. And that's measured in kW, or thousands of watts. And we don't charge a lot for that. Ours are 25 cents a kW. So, if you have a 10,000 watt peak for the month, you're going to have a $2.50 demand charge on your bill. So it's not a huge component, but demand is getting to be a bigger and bigger part of our wholesale bill from Bonneville Power. And so this allows us to more accurately pass on the charges that we see to the customer.
And as I understand it, this is potentially a way to create a more fair rate structure. Could you maybe explain why a demand charge helps you to achieve a more fair rate structure?
Yeah, exactly. So one way to look at it is that demand is charging you for your impact on the grid. Because the entire grid, from the substation, the power line down the street, the transformer out in front of your house, to including the wire from the transformer to your house, all that has to be designed to handle the peak load at your house. Even if you only use that for 5 or 10 minutes a month, all that system has to be able to handle the very highest amount you're going to use. And so you could understand that a house that has a peak of 30,000 watts is going to have a much larger impact on the grid than a house that has a 5,000 watt peak demand. And so by charging a demand rate, we charge people according to their impact on the grid. So, a person that has a smaller impact gets a smaller bill. And I think that it makes a more fair and equitable rate on their costs from Clearwater Power and on our wholesale bill that we receive from Bonneville, where they penalize us for demand also. So we're just trying to pass on those charges in the most transparent and fair way possible.
I know that efficiency and energy efficiency and simple things like making upgrades to your home, to your appliances, are all things that we're as public power are trying to educate on and encourage as much as possible. But if someone out there was trying to maybe find a way that they could reduce their demand and thus reduce their demand charge, where might you say someone would want to start with something like that?
That's a good question. There's some things that you do have control over, like when your washing machine or your dishwasher runs, for example. And most of those modern appliances come with a delay feature. So you can load the dishes in your dishwasher and turn it on, but set it a delay for 4 hours. So instead of running it right at dinner time, right after dinner, maybe it runs at 10 p.m. when the system demand is low. Most people are headed to bed, because our peak usually occurs right around 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, when people are coming home from work, showering and cooking dinner and all that kind of thing, turning the heat on. So if we can get people to push some of that load out of that peak time and shift it to other times. Same thing with your clothes washer. You can put the clothes in and then set it to run later. It'll turn on automatically while you're in bed that way. Most of the appliances nowadays will do that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me, and I guess that also touches on maybe something that would be good to make sure people are totally clear on what their understanding is um, when we're talking about peaks and peak load times and things like that. Is something like a demand charge looking at the peak usage as it relates to, like you said, turning on all these things at one time, or is it more having to do with something like, say, everyone getting home at the same time roughly from work and all using their appliances at once?
It's a good question. Sometimes they're the same thing, but it's a good distinction to make. The consumer's bill is going to be based on what their meter sees as a peak. So that's strictly how many things they have running at their house, and it's not affected by the system peak that Clearwater as a whole sees. When I was talking about our peak being at 6 p.m., that is a system peak. And a lot of times the consumer sees a peak then too, because if they're coming home and someone's taking a shower and someone else is cooking and they've just cranked the heat up that was turned down while everyone was away for the day, then a lot of things are coming on at once. So that may be their individual peak as well, but they could also be different things. So that's a good clarification.
Yeah, and I appreciate you making that clarification because, again, it's just one of those things that we want to make sure people are totally clear on moving forward. Um, as far as trying to actually understand your bill, trying to learn more about what your bill means, I think about maybe the energy bill that I have, for example, and I know that there's information kind of baked into that for some of that, but when we're talking real broadly, when we're talking about most utility customers for public power across the Northwest, are there kind of good general recommendations you could make for somebody who wants to learn more about what their energy bill actually means?
That's a good question. I mean, I know at Clearwater, we try to put a lot of information on the back of the bill. So there's like a full page of information on the back of the bill explaining what that stuff means. But for a lot of people that, maybe that doesn't quite answer everything they're after. And I really encourage them to call in if that's the case, if they have additional questions. We have a really good team of member service representatives here. And I find that we really get a diverse set of questions. So there's not like really one place you can go to get all your answers, but if you call in, our folks can really help. And one thing I see people sometimes avoid calling in is when they're struggling to pay their bill, and some people, they just don't want to deal with it, or they're embarrassed, or whatever the case may be. They may avoid calling in, but that can be the most important time to call in. That's when we can help you the most, because there's no judgment there. Our representatives just want to help. They can put you in touch with agencies that have assistance to help you pay that bill. We can make payment arrangements to let you pay it on a different date, or break it into several payments. We can let you know what other programs we have, like our prepay program, which I think is really a neat thing. A lot of our customers love it because it allows them to pay in advance and just get away from the monthly bill structure we have with standard billing. With prepay, they don't get a bill. There's no late fees. There's no due dates. There's no disconnect fees or reconnect fees. It does away with all that. And there's no security deposits. It's just you put some money down on the account, like a $50 credit on the account that you prepay. And then each day at noon, the computer looks at your meter data, sees how much you used in the last 24 hours. Say you used $5 worth of electricity, it subtracts that from your $50 credit. Now you have a $45 credit, and it just goes on like that every day. And the customers can use our Smart Hub app on their phone or their tablet or the web app, and they can see how much they're using each day. And a a lot of them use less because of that. They're seeing it daily and they adjust their usage accordingly. So it helps them budget, but they can stop by. We have people that'll stop by sometimes and put $5 down on their prepaid account, and they're happy because they're not getting this monthly bill that they maybe don't understand or they're surprised by, and then they can't afford it, and then they're facing possibly an interruption of service or something like that. With the prepaid, it's very predictable. They know every weekday at noon it's gonna deduct the previous day's usage, and they can see how much they've got left. And when they get down to $20, it sends them a text reminding them, hey, you're getting low. You might want to make a payment. And they also get an email. It's just to make sure they don't miss it. And it really works good for a lot of people. It's a totally voluntary program. They can choose whether to go prepay or standard billing, but a lot of people do it just because they don't want to pay a security deposit.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool that that is an option that is available to Clearwater's customers. I'm also really glad that you brought up the topic around someone maybe being embarrassed, right? Because that totally makes sense. It's human nature, but I also think it does touch on something else that we're always trying to make sure we spread the message about, and that is a lot of people have maybe this idea. They're not super familiar with their utility or with public power, and they they say the power company, right? They say it almost like like you guys are a business, and I think sometimes maybe there's a stigma within the within the regular community that you're dealing with a for-profit corporation who might not treat you well if you're in that situation, and so that barrier of embarrassment and not wanting to make that kind of phone call, that's something that I think kind of it shouldn't be a thing with a company anyways, right? But especially when you're talking about public power and public utilities, that's just not really the case at all. And I think it's good to make sure that people are clear on that and aware of that.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point, Austin. We're, like you said, we are a nonprofit cooperative. We're here to help. We're not here to try to make money off the customer, somehow. And what I find is if someone will call in and talk to us, we can always find a solution. I can't think of a single instance where somebody called and talked to us and then we turned off their power for non-pay. We can, like I said, there's so many different things we can do to help. We can always find a solution if they're communicating with us. What the negative, like disconnecting someone for non-pay, that happens when we can't get a hold of somebody. We leave 3 different messages on their phone. We send them emails. We've sent them multiple bills with big red letters across the top, and they don't respond. That's when, as a very last resort, we end up with an interruption of service. And finally, that gets them to call in, and then we can come to a solution. But it's so much better if they'll call in before we get to that point and let us help them.
I think along those lines, for people that want to get into contact with Clearwater specifically so that they could ask you a question, right? If there's listeners of this podcast or people within the Clearwater community that catch wind of this and want to go submit something for Ask Bob, it sounds like you do take submissions, and so I'm curious where someone would have the best success of submitting one of those questions to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest way is on our website. We set up an Ask Bob section specifically for that purpose. So the very first menu on our website is called Services, and underneath that is a Ask Bob section. When you just click on that, it takes you to a form you can ask your question, and it comes directly to me. and I answer all of them. And you can, but I'll take questions any way I can get them. So you can email them to info@clearwaterpower.com. You can just call us at 208-743-1501. You can even write a letter if you want to, but however you get the letter or the question to me, I'll answer it. And like I said, most of them are specific. I answer all of them directly back to the person that asked it. But if it is something that I think applies to all of our customers, there's likely I'll put it in a future Ask Bob column, and I just take all the names out, and they're always featured anonymously.
Oh, that's great. And if anyone hears this podcast and then follows through with submitting an Ask Bob, make sure to give us a shout out. Well, Bob, I really appreciate your time and you taking the time. I know we're winding down here to the end, and I really just have one last thing to run by you, and it's a thing that we like to do here at the end of every episode of DAM. We switch gears back to getting to know more about our guests themselves, and we do that by opening up to talking a little bit about life and getting off the subject of the podcast itself and all the utility and hydropower topics that we're usually covering. And so I think the question that I have for you today might be a first in terms of Ask Bob. I don't know if anyone's ever asked you this question in all the years you've been doing this. So the question is, what kind of life advice could you give to our audience? And the life advice could be anything. Maybe it's something you live by or something you recently came across that has been inspiring you and empowering you in your daily life. But it's open-ended, so the floor is yours.
Well, that's a good question, and I think you're right. I don't think anyone's ever asked Bob that before. I would say, if I had to give people life advice, I would say find a job that you find satisfaction in. I mean, nobody enjoys every minute of every day at their job, but I'd say find a job that satisfies you, because that's what I enjoy about public power the most, is because I feel like I truly get to help people in the course of my job, whether it's my employees or whether it's dealing directly with members and helping them. I feel like I get to do that every day, and that makes it worth coming to work for. And here I am at 31 years at Clearwater Power, and it feels like it's just flown by, and I've enjoyed it. So that would be my advice.
You know, it's funny because we've had some folks on who are in the workforce development side of the industry now, and it's one of the things that we've talked about is people in our world love what they do, truly. And I'm so happy to hear that that's the same case for you. And I think that your advice certainly rings true. That if you can find something like that, and luckily we have a great thing going here with public power in the Northwest, where I think a lot of people really do love their jobs. And hopefully people out there, if they haven't found that yet, they find something that works for them.
Agreed. I think you're 100% right.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for coming on DAM today. I really appreciate getting to share Ask Bob with our listeners, and it's been a really fun conversation. And we've gotten to cover a lot of really important topics that we get to cover them here on the podcast sometimes in very niche ways, but getting to do what we did today was really fun. So thank you for making that happen.
Well, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
I'm sure we all have lots more questions we'd love to ask Bob, and it's a good thing that there's a way to send him your burning questions. But that's going to do it for this one. I owe a huge thanks to Bob for joining the podcast today, and I gotta say, the community that Clearwater serves is lucky to have him on their side. Now, if you have questions for us or have something you'd like to share with us, you can do so by using our contact form on nwriverpartners.org. You can also just email us directly at info@nwriverpartners.org. Either way, we'd love to hear what you think of the podcast what recommendations you have for future episodes, and anything else on your mind. While you're at it, please leave us an honest 5-star review on your favorite listening platform. While you're there, don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes, which arrive every other Friday. Lastly, be sure to follow us on NW River Partners on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We'll be back more soon with more dam. But until then, see ya.